Thank you for joining me here back on Mom Talk. I am ready for another interview. We learned a lot from the last one with Mrs. Botkin. So she's sitting with me again for our second interview, and I am so looking forward to learning more. And you are a mom of 7, grandma of 13. So she's been a mom for a long time, and I've been sitting down with her just to glean and learn from what she's learned so that we can all grow and be blessed in our journey of motherhood. So thank you for joining me again.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, my oldest is 43, my youngest is 29, and none of them went to school ever. Never.
Wow.
So we homeschooled back. We weren't exactly pioneers. People say we were pioneers, but we knew of people who had been homeschooling before we were. But it is true that there wasn't much curriculum available for homeschoolers back then. Becca and Bob Jones made materials for Christian schools. And Calvert School produced materials for missionaries overseas, but there wasn't really anything produced for homeschoolers. In a way, I think that was a good thing because I didn't have to spend a lot of time figuring out what curriculum to use.
Yeah, like so many choices
now. Rainbow Resources has it. It's like a phone book. We realized, my husband and I, like as we thought about homeschooling, we realized, our primary goal in life with our children is to raise them to be disciples, so they need to know the Word of God, and to raise them to be ambassadors. We're called to be ambassadors for Christ. So as ambassadors, rather than, we did study math and science, but we didn't prioritize that as much as we prioritized communication skills. Because language and communication skills, they need to be able to speak English well, grammatically correctly. They need to be able to write English well. They didn't have to like it, and some of them didn't. But they needed to be able to communicate, because an ambassador has to be able to communicate. And then they needed to have something. They needed to have something to communicate. And of course, the most important thing to communicate are the truths in Scripture. But we felt like they needed to know history and how to understand the times also. So those were we did do math and science, but reading and writing and speaking, like public speaking, were important. We kind of trained them around the dining room table. We had this game. It wasn't a game because they didn't like it, but they would have to stand up and do like a 2-minute report on what happened today when I fed the chickens, or something, just something. And they couldn't say and they couldn't say but, and they couldn't say They had to use complete sentences. They were
some of us Canadians will be lost in there without the.
We just thought, this was my husband's idea. We gave them a minute to think, so that they could arrange their ideas into a sequence that made sense.
And you did it every night?
No, not every night. And not every child every night. And it was something more that happened when later on, not when the oldest ones were young, but when the younger ones were like 8 or 9, 10. I think that helped them. Lucas was one of them. He does live videos on T-Rex arms. He can talk, and Isaac also. All of them really can talk in complete sentences using good grammar, and
so they would
put their thoughts in a logical sequence.
Okay, so you would say so and so you are, and then you
give
him a little bit of time.
Yeah, Lucas, stand up.
How much? You give him a few minutes.
A couple minutes to think about it, maybe just a minute. It was, and we weren't asking them.
And so
we were asking them to report on something they had done. So they
so you say stand up, and then
they had to stand up and do it in front of everyone else.
And you give him a topic.
Yes, and it would just be for a minute or 2 minutes.
Topic would be like, tell us about
what you like, a thing you did today. And they hated it, but after a while they got used to doing it, and then
so as long as you didn't use
they couldn't say or but or they couldn't, it had to flow. So that was my husband's
and it had to be 2 minutes long
or a couple minutes. Like he'd give them a time limit, and he didn't time them on his watch, but what he wanted was just for them to be comfortable with standing up and communicating an idea fluently without. I'm
so gonna borrow that.
So, I look at him on camera now and think, wow, He learned that around the dining room table at age 10 or 9 or whatever. And they can all do it, actually. And I think part of it, okay, I did so many things differently than other people. Like, I never taught grammar. And I spent a lot of time deciding which grammar to program to use, and I bought some, but I hated all of them, and the children hated them worse. And I finally concluded that they will learn grammar if I speak good grammar. So I should get grammar books for me and make sure I speak correctly, because they will speak how I speak. You don't have to learn rules about I seen or I saw. You know from hearing it. So I thought if they hear good grammar spoken and if they read good writing, they will learn grammar. And they did. Isaac is the only one that I had parse sentences and all that. The others probably, they may not even know, like, what is an adverb or what is a gerund. They don't really know. But you know what?
They know
I don't think Shakespeare knew that either. And he was the best, probably, wordsmith we ever had in English. So I didn't teach grammar. I just concluded that speaking and hearing, reading good English would be enough. I didn't actually use any textbooks at all.
So how did they learn to write then?
Oh, well, I'll tell you
like
that
your
next.
essays and all that.
I have to finish. I didn't use any textbooks at all except math. We did use Saxon math.
So how did they learn to write essays?
Okay, that's another question, because my husband knew that he wanted them to be able to write. That's really important for a Christian, to be able to write. So he said, I want them to write an essay every day. It was very hard to come up with essay topics that weren't horrible, like my summer vacation, my favorite birthday. They were all just awful, and the children hated them. So I thought, what can I have them write an essay on that won't make them groan and roll their eyes? And I would groan and roll my eyes too if I had to write an essay on that. So it occurred to me, they hated writing. Like, they could talk, they could all talk, they could talk with no trouble whatever, but they hated writing. It was hard, and I thought it's because they don't write. They can talk because they do it. They can't write because they aren't used to doing it. So I just need to make them do it. What can they write about, though? Well, it occurred to me, if I would just have them write a summary of what they read that day. So we started doing that. At the time, the girls were studying English history. I think they were 12 and 14, or maybe they were 10 and 12, and Ben was 8. And the younger ones, like the older ones, were kind of already off doing other things, helping their dad in his business, and the younger ones were too young. So Ben, we had internet, but it was dial-up, and so we had the World Book. So Ben he would write what was called World Book reports, and he could pick out anything he was very systematic. So he started with A, and he'd like armadillo, and he'd read about armadillos, and he'd write a little half-page essay about armadillos. It had to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It had to have like an introductory sentence, and then the main information, and then a closing sentence that sort of tied it together. And so he did that, and I have a whole little notebook of them: airplane, armadillo, aardvark. He'd pick his own topic and he'd write. And then the girls was more complicated, because we were studying English history, and I realized, like, this book might say this about Mary Queen of Scots, but let's see what this book says about Mary Queen of Scots. Maybe this book was written by a Catholic and they thought she was wonderful, and this book is written by Protestant, and they're different. You can't just trust one book, which was an important thing to learn. So we actually had 3 books, and when we'd read about a particular event in English history, we'd read all 3 to get 3 perspectives, because one perspective, even your own perspective on a thing, is not going to see all of it. So it ended up taking them all afternoon. They spent so much time on it, but I didn't make them. But they would read the 3 different books, and then they would go to write, and they would realize, oh, I don't remember any of it. So then they'd start again with their brain turned on, and they would read it, knowing they needed to learn something from it. And so it taught them how to read better, with not just moving their eyes over the words, but actually read it, thinking about the ideas that are. It taught them to read better, and it also taught them to analyze what's happening and to realize there are different perspectives. It taught them how to be a better researcher and before you write on something, you can't just have one perspective on it. You need, so it would take them almost all day to write or all afternoon to read their reading and then write their thing about the event that happened in English history. And I of course intended as a mom to go back and correct them all every day with my red pen.
How did that go? Because as soon as you're talking about it, I'm like, yes, I have my children write their stuff, the report on what they're reading. But the question is, I never get to it all.
Well,
how did you do
I of course, my intentions were to do it every day. That didn't happen. But in the back of my mind was the idea that perhaps they'll get better just by writing.
Practice.
Maybe I don't have to teach them. Maybe they'll just learn to do it by doing it. And that is what happened. I didn't correct it every day. I did look at them occasionally. But what I found out is that the more they wrote, the better at it they became. And I didn't have to teach them because they learned it on their own. They even learned syntax and punctuation.
And they got to where they eventually wrote books.
And then they from that they learned to write. They've written a couple of books. But that is how I taught my children to write, because part of what's difficult about writing is if they have to write about something they don't know about, and if it's creative writing, well, we just didn't do that. That's fine if you can do that. If you can't do that, don't do it. So they wrote summaries of what they had read, and maybe they wrote a summary of a book they read, or maybe they wrote a summary of an animal, or
that's
whatever.
what I have my girls right now doing. They like to read. Someone, it's read, but you gotta write me a summary. Or me, or another late teacher who works who pours in our school. She's gonna be able to read your summary. Oh, I read your summary. I know what you learned.
Well, I made him churn one out every day. Ben's, he was like 8. It was half a page in one of those composition books. And the girls would write a page or two. They only had to write a page, and the lines are fairly big, but they would write more sometimes. But that is how I taught everybody to write. I didn't have a program, and I believe reading good writing is how they learn grammar. For science, we just used books from the library, which had better books back then, books about volcanoes or dinosaurs or something. And we didn't use a text. And we actually collected specimens. I had studied zoology and entomology in college. It's one of my many rabbit trails. But so we would collect specimens and identify them. We had Audubon guides to insects and reptiles and birds, and we would identify things and draw them. And then history, we just read all the time. We didn't necessarily, with the boys, I let them read about, whatever they're interested in. If they're interested in World War II, fine, you can read it. That's what you'll study this year is World War II or Vietnam or whatever. I kind of let them. There was a man when I was young. The only man in the homeschool movement teaching at homeschool conferences was Greg Harris. I really appreciate a lot that I learned from him, and he had this idea of delight-directed curriculum. Let your children study what they're delighted in, which actually turned out to be a good thing, and especially
because then you're removing the whole struggle and all that they actually want to learn.
And another thing, take advantage of the teachable moment. Like, this is particularly good with your younger ones. If they're super interested in, say you find an animal, they're super interested in learning about it, well, just skip what you were going to do for school and do that. When someone is interested in knowing about something and they want to know about it, that is when they will remember what they learned. Not later when you're studying this in the springtime. Do it. Go ahead and take advantage of that. But you can't, of course, only let your children study what they want.
They might never want to do math.
No, they'll never do algebra. I can probably assure you they'll never do algebra.
I was trying to convince myself, you like math, don't you?
Yeah.
I like social study. I'm like, but you thought you like math too. No, that's my 8-year-old.
Well, part of what we have to teach our children is that life involves doing things you don't want to do.
That's right.
You just have to do it anyway. And so there's a fair amount of that, of course. But as much as possible, I let them study things they were really interested in. And that was really helpful as my boys became teenagers. I had 5 boys. And it became awkward for me as a woman to have authority over them who were men, biblically men, once they're over 13. It's a difficult thing. I didn't want to, I just didn't know how good it was for them as men, young men, but men, to be ordered around by a woman. So I tried to not order them around, but appeal to them and just tell them about, look, I'm not doing, this whole education thing, I'm not doing it for me. This is for you. What I'm trying to do is help you learn what you're going to need to know to be a man. And, is there something you want me to help you find out about? So like Lucas at one point wanted to learn emergency medicine. So I bought him all the emergency medicine books that I could. So, and that really is our whole, because we weren't, for most of them, we didn't live in Tennessee. We weren't in an umbrella school. We didn't have to have particular requirements, but there's a way to work with that. But I was able to let them study the things they were interested in. And I saw myself as they got older, I wasn't the teacher. I was sort of a facilitator. They were teaching themselves. I couldn't possibly, with 7 children, I couldn't possibly teach them everything they needed to know. And I didn't know everything they needed to know. So I taught them, I realized they have to do this themselves. They have to learn to teach themselves. And it will be helpful if I don't teach them to hate it. If I don't, they're born with a love of learning, children are, and we need to try to make sure we don't interfere with that. And by trying to make children learn to read before they're ready and things like that, we can teach them that they're stupid. We can teach them that they hate books. We need to be really careful not to do that and not to take the joy out of it, because they do have a joy in learning naturally when they're young. I'm mixing up all my ideas. These are some of my best ideas, but they're separate. But I think as the boys got older, I'll go back to that. I try to involve them more
in what you want to learn.
In what they would be studying, and try to communicate that this is not something I'm doing to you. This is something I'm helping you do to yourself. And I think that helped a lot, just to have that talk with them, and then to try to treat them like it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard for moms. Children are supposed to respect their parents, but I believe that parents are supposed to respect their children too. They're made in the image of God. And we have to treat them with respect, even when they are being naughty and in your face and awful. We need to treat them with respect as creatures made in the image of God. And I think that it's easy to slip into not doing that. And so as they were teenagers, I think it was, the Lord brought that to my mind, that they are men, they're created in God's image. I need to treat them with respect. Even though I am the authority figure, that doesn't mean I don't treat them with respect. And I think that helped, because it's very difficult to get a teenage boy to do things if he doesn't want to do them. I think you need to sort of appeal to him more than you're kind of ordering him. It's a complicated thing as a mom of men, young men.
Well, thank you for sharing your homeschooling. So you had a couple of things. You wanted them to learn to be disciples, be ambassadors, which required that they were able to communicate well, both orally and written. And those are the things you focus on that shaped your homeschooling.
Yeah, my husband wasn't involved much with the day-to-day work, but he kind of, he gave me, he said, parameters. They need to learn this. And then a really important part of their homeschooling took place every evening around the dining room table. As we would talk about the day, he would talk about things happening in the world and how do we analyze that biblically and evaluate that. So that was a very important part of their homeschooling, which wasn't, it wasn't part of the scope and
explains why
sequence.
they're who they are today.
It wasn't part of what I was written down in their curriculum plan or whatever, but it was a very important part of their education. And And then, of course, teaching them Bible. That wasn't part of our curriculum because we didn't want them to get the idea that, when you're finished with school,
You're done with the Bible.
you're done with that. Actually, we never graduated. We never had any of our children graduate. We never had a graduation party.
Again, you were doing it years ago.
Right. Well, we just thought we don't want to give them the impression that learning is a thing that comes to an end when you're 18. We want them to be lifelong learners. So we didn't have, in our school, there wasn't really any graduate, and they're still learning now. And actually, my son Isaac said that the other day in a podcast he did on the T-Rex Arms Reading List, that we don't ever want our children to stop learning. We want them to be lifelong learners, and that was something we wanted them to always be reading, always learning. You never quit. You don't ever graduate. If what you're after is a diploma, you graduate.
Yeah.
If what you're after is an education, well, there's no stopping that. You still are educating yourself as an adult, and it's interesting. It seemed to work because all 7 of my children are doing things and they're all successful, financially successful adults, and they're all doing things they taught themselves.
Because they learned
to do that early. Like Isaac knows animation, and Lucas Noah knows coding. I didn't teach him coding. I don't know anything about that. Ben is a music composer. I didn't teach him that. I took him to piano lessons, but he taught himself composing. We provided the materials. We provided a computer that could do that. The girls taught themselves to write. David, they've all taught themselves everything that they're doing right now, and that is really, I think, in addition to being prepared to be ambassadors for the Lord, I think an educated person is a person who can teach himself anything he might need to know that they don't know, and don't worry about leaving gaps. There will always be gaps, and if you went to public school, you probably just have a gap, one big gap.
Yeah.
But I think that's, to me, those are the 2 main things: an ambassador and the ability to teach themselves what they know, what they might need to know in the future, whatever it might be.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Wow, lots to take away from this, and I hope you moms were blessed by this. Let me know if you have any questions and comment, leave them below. Let me know what you're taking away from, because I got quite a few notes in my head that I am taking. Thank you for sitting down with me. I appreciate it.
Well, again, Soli Deo Gloria, to the Lord goes all the glory. If I ever did a wise thing, or if I ever said a wise thing, it was because of the grace of God on my life.
Amen. Well, thank you so much. Okay, mamas, until next time, tune in for next interview. If you have not subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Share these videos with other moms so they also be encouraged. And reminding you that we have daily devotions Monday to Friday, about 5 minutes or so to 15 minutes a day. So check those in every morning, and then Saturdays for more interviews like this. Okay, until next time, bye-bye.